you've enjoyed all the presentations today. So we're at the end. So I hope to just keep your attention for a few more minutes. Fortunately, this is a nice, easy talk, so very easy to follow. And feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Python sparse data analysis package, or PySAP. Firstly, we're just going to take a little step back and just talk about inverse problems in general. So this is something that has been covered fairly intensively today already, but we're going to go through it very easily. So in general, there are many different problems that can be formulated as a linear inverse problem. So some data vector that we obtain, acquire, or observe, some operation matrix that distorts that data or changes that data in some way, and then some model vector or some true data set that we want to recover. So, the inverse aspect of this is that, of course, we observe this object and we're trying to recover that object there. So a concrete example might be something like observing an image of a raccoon. That image has been blurred by some kernel that we perhaps know from an instrument, a camera, or something like that. And what we'd like to do is recover the original image, unblurred image of this raccoon. So, of course, if we try to do this analytically, that doesn't work if there's any noise whatsoever in that observation. And the reason for that is, of course, because that's an ill-posed problem. And particularly in that particular example, that there's an ill-conditioned matrix that was trying to be used. So, so this is something that we has already been discussed throughout the meeting today. I don't need to go into too many details, but one of the things that needs to be done, of course, when we have an ill-posed problem of this type, is introduce some kind of regularization into the problem. Right, so regularization is a way of using prior information that we have about the problem of interest. And it also helps prevent things like overfitting to the data that we observe. So a particular example of regularization, and one that is the most interest for PySAP in particular, is sparse regularization. So again, we've heard a bit about that today so far. But concretely, just a simple example, if we had something like a sine wave, we can transform this data into a different space, in this case using a Fourier transform, where we have a sparser representation of that signal. And by that, we mean that most of the coefficients are 0 or very close to 0, meaning that the minimal amount of information in that space is needed to represent all of the signal. So in order to do so, we need some kind of dictionary phi. And this dictionary is going to act as the transform between those two different spaces. Once we have some dictionary phi, we can formulate an optimization problem, as you see on the right here, where we have some data fidelity term, which ensures that we recover something closely approximating to our original signal, but we also impose this regularization term, forcing that signal to be sparse in a certain domain that we've defined by our dictionary phi. Okay, so this I think is probably obvious for everyone on the call today, but this is just kind of the general type of problem that we're trying to solve with PySAP. So what is PySAP itself? Well, firstly, PySAP started via the COSMIC project. So COSMIC stands for Compressed Sensing for Magnetic Resonance Imaging and Cosmology, an interesting combination of terms that you probably won't see very often. So this was a project that was funded by CEA to foster kind of collaboration between different departments. So in this particular case, it was a collaboration between Cosmostat, which is a lab at the astrophysics department that specializes in cosmology and statistics, and the imaging department in Neurospin. And the idea being to share like information that we've learned on different applications to develop tools together, to help both of each other out in any application. So from this, there's been many different people who have worked on different aspects of PySAP. Some of the faces you will definitely recognize from today. And we definitely benefited from younger people like Zach, who've contributed to this project. So what is PySAP made of? So PySAP is actually composed of kind of 3 different elements. And just a quick caveat here is that we have on my slides links to the repositories and the papers and so on. So I will circulate a PDF version, but you can click on all of these links if you're interested. So the three different components that make up PySAP are Sparse2D, ModOpt, and a series of plugins. So I'm going to explain to you what each of those components does, and then how they can be used together to solve certain types of inverse problems. Okay, so the first component is Sparse2D. So Sparse2D, as we were talking right at the beginning on what sparsity means, is Sparse2D provides these dictionaries for solving our inverse problems. So it's a library of wavelets in 1, 2, and 3D that allows us to transform different types of signals into a sparser representation of those signals. So whether it's some kind of time domain data or images or some higher dimensional cube of information. So Sparse2D is written in C++, and PySAP, what it does is provide full Python bindings to all of those wavelets. So that means that when you're working inside of a Jupyter notebook or any other Python environment, you can use all of these transforms in exactly the same way you would use any Python function within the PySAP environment. So one particular example of a wavelet that is included in PySAP is the starlet decomposition. So this is a kind of fancy wavelet that was pioneered by Jean-Luc Starck. And is particularly well suited for astronomical images. So it's an undecimated isotropic wavelet transform. And so it's particularly good at taking something like an image of a galaxy and decomposing it into different scales of spatial frequency. And the nice aspect of this particular transform is that once you decompose it, you can recover your original image by simply summing all of these wavelet scales together. So this is fully implemented in PySAP and available to the users to analyze their data, among many others. Okay, so then once you've established your wavelet dictionaries that you want to use for any given sparse analysis problem, you also need a few other things, namely some optimization algorithm that will allow you to solve your minimization problem. You need some way of implementing the regularization. So in case of PySAP, what we've implemented is a series of proximity operators that implement, concretely what is done during a sparse thresholding or hard thresholding. And we've also got other things like low rank approximation and a positivity constraint, which is often used for image analysis. And finally, we have a connection to Sparse2D via a series of linear operators that allow you to access the different wavelet transforms. And then a basic implementation of a cost function that allow you to track your problem and see if you're converging. So all of the ModOpt is written in Python and is designed to be a very modular kind of Lego-like toolbox. So essentially, you can take the algorithm you want, you can take the proximity operator you want and the wavelet that you want and stick them all together to make a given optimization problem. So here's just a quick example of how all of the pieces fit together. So if we were to look at, for example, a primal dual splitting algorithm like this Condevaux algorithm here, what ModOpt will do is will provide you with a component, a class that you can create that will establish what the gradient of your problem is. So in this case, just the gradient of this data fidelity term. It will provide you with the tools necessary to implement the sparse thresholding that you need to impose the sparsity on the solution of your problem. It will give you the interface with Sparse2D that allows you to do your wavelet transformation back and forth. And then, it actually implements the algorithm itself and you can solve the problem directly. So then the final component that makes up PySAP are what we call plugins. So the plugins are probably the most interesting part for most of the imaging communities that we're going to deal with. As what the plugins do take these tools, so a given algorithm, given proximity operator, given wavelet transform, and then apply them to a very specific application. So, if you want to reconstruct the image of a brain or of a galaxy or of some, microscopic material, you might want to choose a particular setup with particular hyperparameters and so on, and build a kind of more user-friendly tool where you can kind of just plug in your data and get the result out. And that's precisely what we have in place. We'll have one plugin called PySAP MRI, which has been developed by the team in Neurospin specifically for applications to biomedical imaging. We have a PySAP Astro plugin that implements some of the tools that we use in the astrophysical image analysis. And then there's another one that's currently being developed for electron tomography by a group in Grenoble. Inside these plugins, we also provide tools that allow other groups, if you're interested in PySAP and wanted to collaborate, but you work on a different imaging domain, we actually provide a plugin, a builder, essentially like a template, so that if you wanted to build a new plugin for working on a completely different domain, we'd have all those tools, and then you could request that be integrated into the full Python environment, PySAP environment, and then it will be distributed to the community as part of PySAP. Okay, so I think the most important aspect that I wanted to get into is that PySAP is a fully open source environment. So we have a full set of contribution guidelines explaining how to contribute to the package, what we expect from a developer in order to get something added to PySAP. We have a set of a code of conduct to ensure that it's a safe and respectful environment for all of the people working in PySAP. And we also, have special issue templates to try to help all the users get the right answers that they need to their questions. Okay, so now that you have an idea of what PySAP is and what the objective that we're aiming for is, let me just tell you about a few of the specific applications where PySAP has already been used. So I'll first start from my background, which is in the astrophysics, so on weak gravitational lensing. So if you're not familiar, weak gravitational lensing is a distortion of the path of light by a large source of matter. So in the universe, as light travels from distant galaxies, it will pass through regions of high concentrations of matter. And in most cases, this will be dark matter, so matter that we cannot observe itself. And then that will deflect the light path of that. And when it reaches us, what the end result is a distortion of the image that we see. So concretely, what we see is usually a kind of squishing of galaxy images. And what we can try to do is, if we can figure out how much these galaxy images have been distorted, then we can then inversely infer how much dark matter was required to cause that distortion in the first place. So it's very nice and a very beautiful technique, but the problem is that we can see here, there's a nice picture of what people would see in the newspaper or a magazine of what a galaxy looked like. And on the right, we have more realistically a representation of what we'd actually see in an observation. And so very difficult to measure from this kind of pixelated blob what the shape of that object is to within kind of 1% accuracy, and then use that to infer the amount of dark matter. So in that case, we need to try to take advantages of many signal processing tools as possible. So one thing we could think about is that part of the distortion we see to that image is blurring introduced by the point spread function of the telescope that's being used to observe that. So that's the instrument response. So if we know what that instrument response is, and we can take advantage of things like sparsity or a lower rank approximation, we can try to use that to deconvolve, i.e. remove that blurring from the observation and then recover the true image. So we have a paper that came out on that several years ago. All of the tools used to produce this work are included in PySAP. Very similar application along the same lines is now, in the previous example, we assumed we knew what the instrument response was, but in reality, when we take observations with telescopes, we don't know that perfectly, specifically at the position of galaxy images. So a PhD student in Cosmostat, Tobias Viodat, has been working on using a multi-CCD point spread function modeling approach where he, builds this non-parametric PSF model using all of the information available in the sky, all of the stars that are available over the whole field of view. And in order to do this, he's using the backend of PySAP with all the algorithms that we provide. Right, so moving to different domain. So something that will probably be more familiar to most of the people on the call today, compressed sensing, specifically in biomedical imaging. One of the issues that many people in your domain have to deal with is, the issue of how long can you keep a person in an MRI and scan the Fourier space needed to fully sample the image, right? So of course, if you can reduce the amount of time, you have less artifacts introduced by people moving around, and having an efficient acquisition strategy can help you achieve that. The problem is that if you subsample that Fourier space, you have a more complicated reconstruction problem. So various PhD students in Peep's team have been looking at using different algorithms to reconstruct brain images, whether it be with like parallel imaging, so some work done by Lubna El-Ghedari, or this sparkling technique, which uses these kind of optimized acquisition strategies, and then significantly reduces the acquisition time at the cost of more complicated reconstruction. But thankfully, using some of the tools in PySAP, we can get pretty good reconstruction of those brain images from the subsample data. Okay, so finally, as I mentioned, there's also a team led by Zineb Zaghi, who is looking at other things like electron tomography, and I think there's some results that she's obtained from PySAP using for erbium-doped porous silicon, which I'm sure she would be able to explain a lot better than I. And then the last point I just wanted to highlight of what is available from PySAP are a series of tutorials that have been developed by Chetia and Eurospin team, particularly for the PySAP MRI plugin, demonstrating how to build the different types of solutions to different types of image reconstruction problems in this domain. Okay, so I think that's my 20 minutes. So I just end with the summary, just to let you know that PySAP is ongoing development. We're looking for more people to contribute and improve and expand the scope of what PySAP can do. We have plenty of plans to how to make it better going forward, particularly looking at moving to more GPU computation, so relating back to Zach's talk about Jean-Zé and trying to take advantage of those resources that are available to us, as well as making sure that the tool is just user-friendly and well documented, so that people understand what's available and can take the most advantage of it. And that's it. Thank you very much.